Anything where we can get a little bit more flexion, extension, and rotation through the T-spine, I think that's going to be kind of the hinge that swings the door as far as shoulder health. But then from there, again, just strengthening the shoulder girdle, strengthening the rotator cuff. And I think that's where you get more into the kind of traditional band exercises. But I think one key component that's missed by a lot of coaches is focusing on the T-spine and how that affects what the shoulders are doing.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And so you're focusing on mainly like T-spine mobility. Or is there like T-spine strengthening that they need? Or is it like they're already too strong and stiff up there and you just want that mobility?
I think it's definitely a beautiful combination of both, right? And in the past, what we would have done to maybe get some better, upward rotation of the scaps is something like a wall slide or a Y raise, something like that. And what we found is, we would spend a ton of time with an athlete who had poor overhead mobility. We would spend all offseason really focused on those kind of drills, like serratus slides, rollouts, anything like that. But is that matching the force or the speed necessary to actually get into an overhead throwing position?
Right.
Probably not, right? So how do we add some speed or some force into that equation so that we can get a little bit more carryover into something that requires those high levels of forces and speeds like pitching? So one thing that we've actually included a lot more of is like kettlebell skill work. With the Turkish get up, obviously that's going to require a T-spine to extend, rotate, but it's also going to add some force into the equation because now an athlete is having to react to whatever that kettlebell is doing. So it's going to have to stabilize at the same time as getting mobility, right? So it's a beautiful combination of strength and stability and flexibility, mobility, kind of all combined into one. So that's where in the past we would have used drills like those, serratus wall slides or like the Y raises. But I think we still use those. I think those still have a place in creating context for athletes and what positions they should be getting into. But in order to create carryover into something as dynamic as throwing, I think you need to look a little bit further as a coach into how much, force these athletes are putting through that shoulder.
Right. And
how can what we do in the gym more positively affect that.
Right.
And also, too, I think from a programming perspective and exercises that our athletes are doing, whether you're looking at like a push-up or really any row variation or like landmine overhead pressing, it's making sure that like you're intentional about that movement, like everything you're doing, making sure you're kind of focused on what that shoulder blade is doing as you get into overhead position, or if we're doing a push-up, getting a lot of protraction through that push-up at the top of the movement. Same thing with our row variations, just being intentional about what we're doing with those movements.
Okay, for sure.
I think that's a great point, is like every exercise in the gym can be considered arm care, right? Like if we are weak anywhere in the body and we're throwing, like we have a lot of kids who are not that strong, but because of their natural ability and the time they've spent really optimizing their ability to throw, it's putting a ton of stress on the shoulder, but their body is just not ready to withstand that, right? But if we can get a kid a little bit stronger in a split squat position and maybe get his core to actually decelerate a little bit more than his shoulder girdle having to do it, it's automatically going to put less stress on the shoulder. So I think a lot of people are so focused on being like sport specific and working just on the rotator cuff, when in fact, like if I get an athlete a little bit stronger in a split squat, or if I do, get them doing some chops and just basic core work, stuff that's going to allow them to decelerate a little bit more efficiently, that in itself is going to take a lot of stress off the shoulder. And so maybe it's not the shoulder and the rotator cuff strength that's the issue. Maybe it's our inability to decelerate the rest of our body is putting too much stress on that shoulder in the first place.
Right.